Michael, today's the fifth year in a row where I'm covering the annual World Economic Forum meeting in Davos from the point of view of Oxfam. For anyone listening to this interview who is not very au fait with the World Economic Forum and the annual Oxfam reports on inequality, could you give us an overview of why Oxfam are in the news a lot around the world this week?
Okay, well, the World Economic Forum takes place in Davos every year around this time in January, and it's a global gathering of the great and good around the world, basically the political and financial elites. And they get together to look at trends in the world and decide a lot of policies that will affect the rest of us. And Oxfam has been saying for the last 5 years that the global inequality crisis, where last year billionaires' wealth went up by 2.5 billion a day, while the poorest half of humanity, that's 3.8 billion people, their wealth declined by 500 million a day, is the biggest challenge facing humanity at the moment, and it has to be taken seriously. And that's really why I guess we're in the news. You see a big event where people are smoozing, people are making decisions. Usually they're billionaires or they're world leaders who would be listening to the ear of billionaires, but not listening to the majority of humanity who aren't benefiting from economic and social policies. So we hold up a mirror to what's going on in Davos and saying things need to change.
Am I right in saying that Oxfam are not an anti-capitalist organisation, but you believe that the way the current financial system works is not fair?
Well, no, Oxfam isn't anti-wealth, we're anti-poverty. And there has been huge achievements in reducing poverty in the last few decades. Extreme poverty has been halved in the last 15 to 20 years. However, major institutions like the World Bank have pointed out that the extreme inequality that the world is experiencing at the moment is going to block our attempts to get rid of extreme inequality altogether. I can give you an example from Zambia. Zambia is one of the fastest growing economies in Africa. Between 1998 and 2010, its economy grew by 6%. Yet during this period, 4 million people fell into poverty. So as you said, it's the type of growth we see, the type of economic decisions isn't pro-poor, and it isn't inclusive. What we're calling for is inclusive and sustainable growth that doesn't just benefit those at the top, but prioritising lifting people out of poverty.
I believe in your report that you launched a few days ago, you said that the poorest half of the people in the world saw their wealth decrease by 11%. Is that, I assume, the effect of, we hear about in the media in Ireland over the last year, there's been a slowdown in emerging markets, to use that term. Is that what that is, kind of like?
It's hard to pinpoint exactly why it is. That may be one factor, but probably the biggest factor, as I pointed out with the example of Zambia, that the global economy is still growing, and emerging economies and poor economies in total are still growing. It's where that extra economic benefit is going to, and it's going more to people at the top than people on the bottom. So that's why we would estimate that fall in wealth has happened.
Okay, and I only saw it today. There was a big article in the Irish Times yesterday about Oxfam in India, wasn't there?
Yes, well, Oxfam works in over 90 countries. We not just bring out a big global report, but a number of countries, especially the big countries like India and Brazil, have done really in-depth analysis about their countries, and the global trends are replicated in these countries. Like India has had massive amount of growth in the last few decades. Their economy has come on really strong. But like what we're saying in Zambia, what we're saying around the world, it hasn't benefited everybody. So the top 10% in India control 76% of the wealth. So, little over 20% of the wealth in India is left for the other 90%. And that's hugely challenging for the people at the bottom, who aren't being lifted out of poverty because of this massive growth.
I saw some tweets on Twitter yesterday by US economist Jesse Colombo, and he was saying that over the last 10 years, the increase in wealth amongst people who are wealthy in the West and in the world in general, it's an increase in their value of their assets. Like it's not actually a cash increase in their wealth. Do you know anything about that?
Well, there's a number of ways that people's wealth increase, and it is true that some degree of wealth increase is due to assets like housing property, and it might be a cash asset, but it can be transferred into a cash asset. But when we're looking at the 1% or even the top 10 of the 1%, most of their extreme increases, when we're talking about billionaires who have hundreds of billions of dollars, most of that is through financial assets, through shares, through currency holdings, through stocks, etc. And they can easily be transferred into cash.
There's a US Democratic Party Congresswoman, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, I believe her name is, and she's been getting a lot of publicity in the last few months saying that wealthy people in the US should pay a lot more tax. Did you know much or support her work much?
Well, I think she's opened up a very important debate in the US, that we know that the top rate of personal income tax in rich countries fell from 62% in 1970 to just 38% a few years ago. When America really tackled inequality before after the Depression, they agreed that to really deal with this problem, that wealthy people had to pay their fair share, and that meant paying a higher level of tax, similar to what the Congresswoman is asking for. So the exact dynamics of it, would need to be worked out, but certainly we would be saying that rich people need to pay their fair share of tax, and we don't believe that they are at the moment.
Okay, Michael, from an Irish government point of view, what changes do you believe that they should make?
Well, for the main way that Ireland interfaces with this problem is through our corporate tax policy. While our corporate tax policy has been very beneficial domestically in creating jobs and facilitating investment, there's sort of a parallel side to that people are probably aware of since the Apple judgment, where money flows through our accounts from other countries and also from poor countries that has little economic benefit to Ireland, but facilitates those companies to avoid large amounts of tax. This is hugely negative for poor countries because their ability to provide public services to help poor people lift themselves out of poverty is dependent on being able to generate revenue from economic activity, including the profits of corporations. So we would call on the Irish government, although they have made a good start in trying to tackle this problem, there really needs to be a fundamental reform of the corporate tax system. And that reform needs to have the voices of the poorest country in discussions, because they're going to be most impacted by that. There's hopefully going to be a new round of reforms starting for discussion at the OECD level. I know France, even today, has been calling for a global minimum effective tax rate. So they're the type of things that we need to look at seriously, and that Ireland has to really start thinking about supporting rather than being a blocker.
Okay, Michael, how can any of our listeners who want to find out more about your work on inequality and your Even It Up campaign support you?
Well, Oxfam is part of a global campaign called Even It Up, which is trying to address the inequality crisis. In Ireland, as I said, we're particularly interested in corporate tax reform. So if anybody wants to find out more about our campaign or any of our work, if they go to our website, oxfamireland.org, they can find out more, and it'll direct you to our campaigns page.